Welcome to Module 4, When Emotions Take Control, Understanding Your Complexes. You're having a perfectly reasonable conversation when suddenly something shifts, a comment, a tone of voice, or even just a facial expression triggers an emotional reaction that seems far more intense than the situation warrants. In an instant, your mood changes. Your perspective narrows, and you find yourself saying or doing things you later regret. We've all experienced these moments when emotions seem to take control, when we feel not quite ourselves. In Jungian psychology, these experiences often signal the activation of what Jung called a complex, an emotionally charged cluster of ideas and memories that function like a mini personality within a larger psyche. Understanding complexes provides a powerful framework for making sense of our seemingly irrational emotional reactions, repetitive patterns, and internal conflicts. More importantly, it offers a path toward greater emotional freedom, not by eliminating these aspects of ourselves, but by developing more conscious relationships with them. Jung discovered complexes through his word association experiments. He would read a list of words to subjects, asking them to respond with the first word that came to mind while measuring their reaction time. He noticed that certain words produced delays, unusual responses, or physiological changes like increased sweating or changes in breathing. Further investigation revealed that these disruptions weren't random but clustered around certain emotional themes unique to each individual. Jung called these clusters feeling-toned complexes, networks of emotionally charged memories, perceptions, and ideas organized around a common theme. A complex forms when emotional experiences, particularly repeated or intense ones, create a pattern in the psyche. At the center of each complex is a core experience or archetype that gives it its essential character. Around this core cluster, associated memories, emotions, physical sensations, and beliefs. For example, a person with a rejection complex might have at its core early experiences of abandonment or exclusion. Associated with this might be memories of specific rejections, beliefs like I'm not good enough or people always leave me, physical sensations of chest tightening or stomach dropping, and emotions like shame or fear. What makes complexes so powerful is that they function somewhat autonomously, like subpersonalities within the larger psyche. When activated, a complex can temporarily take over, influencing perception, emotion, and behavior in ways that may seem foreign to one's normal identity. Signs that a complex has been activated include emotional reactions disproportionate to the current situation, sudden mood shifts or personality changes, repetitive thoughts or behaviors that feel compulsive, physical sensations like tension, constriction, or energy shifts, and a sense of being taken over by a familiar emotional pattern. Complexes typically remain dormant in the unconscious until triggered by something in the environment that resembles or symbolically connects to their core theme. When activated, they function like emotional filters, coloring how we perceive and interpret our experiences. A person with an authority complex, for instance, might perceive a neutral comment from a boss as criticism or control, triggering defensive or submissive behaviors that puzzle others who didn't see the interaction as threatening. This filtering effect helps explain why different people can experience the same situation so differently. We don't see reality differently, but through the lenses of our complexes, which selectively highlight certain aspects while minimizing or distorting others. Jung described complex activation as a kind of possession, a temporary state where a part of the personality takes control of the whole. During these states, our normal perspective narrows, our emotional range becomes restricted, and our behavioral options seem limited to familiar patterns associated with the complex. The body plays a crucial role in complex activation. Each complex has associated physical patterns, characteristic tensions, postures, and sensations that accompany its emotional state. These bodily components help explain why complex work often requires somatic approaches, not just cognitive understanding. While complexes are uniquely personal in their specific content, certain types appear frequently due to common human experiences. Let's explore some of the more universal. The mother complex forms around experiences with one's mother or mothering figures and influences how we relate to nurturing, dependence, dependency, and the feminine principle. A positive mother complex might manifest as comfortable with being intimate and emotional connection, while a negative one might appear as excessive dependency or fear of engulfment. The father complex, similarly, contains our experiences with fathers or father figures and shape our relationship to authority, structure, and the masculine principle. This might manifest as issues with authority figures, difficulties with self-discipline, or particular patterns in relationships with men. The inferiority complex, which entered popular language through Alfred Adler's work, involves deep feelings of inadequacy and compensatory behaviors meant to disprove these painful beliefs. Someone with an active inferiority complex might oscillate between self-deprecation and grandiose attempts to prove their worth. A superiority complex often functions as a defense against underlying feelings of inferiority. The person preemptively asserts their superiority, intelligence, or special status to avoid confronting deeper insecurities. Power and victim complexes represent opposite poles of the same dynamic. The power complex manifests as excessive need for control, while the victim complex appears as a pattern of helplessness and being controlled by others. Many people oscillate between these positions rather than staying fixed in one. Relationship complexes specifically affect how we connect with others, often based on early attachment patterns. These might manifest as fear of abandonment, difficulty with trust, or repetitive patterns of choosing certain types of partners. Beyond personal complexes, Jung also recognized cultural and collective complexes, emotional patterns shared by groups, communities, or entire societies. These often appear around issues of national identity, historical trauma, shared values, and they can powerfully influence collective behavior. How can you identify what triggers your complexes? Start by paying attention to emotional reactions that seem disproportionate to the situation. The intensity of the reaction often signals that something beyond the present circumstance is being activated. The current event has tapped into a deeper emotional pattern. External triggers might include specific words or phrases, tones of voice or facial expressions, situations that symbolically resemble past experiences, relationship dynamics that echo earlier patterns. environmental cues like sounds, smells, or physical sensations. Internal triggers can be equally powerful. Thoughts or memories, physical states like fatigue or hunger, dreams that activate complex material, anniversary reactions to significant events, identity challenges or role transitions. Stress plays a significant role in complex activation. When we're well rested, supported, and emotionally regulated, our threshold for triggering is higher. When exhausted, isolated, or under pressure, our complexes activate more easily. This explains why we might handle a comment perfectly well one day, but react strongly to something similar when stressed. Complexes rarely operate in isolation. Often, the activation of one complex triggers others and a cascade effect. The rejection complex might trigger a defense complex, which then activates a self-sabotage complex, creating a familiar emotional sequence that seems to have a life of its own. This interconnection is particularly evident in relationships, where one person's complex often triggers complementary complexes in others, creating stable but problematic patterns. A classic example is the pursuer-distancer dynamic, where one's partner's abandonment complex activates the other's engulfment complex, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. Recognizing when you've been triggered is the first step toward greater freedom. Signs include physical sensation like tensions or energy shifts, emotional flooding, thinking in absolute terms, feeling younger than your age, or recognizing familiar self-talk or internal voices. How might you work more consciously with your complexes? The goal isn't to eliminate them. Complexes represent important aspects of your psychological makeup, but to develop a more conscious relationship with them, reducing their automatic control over your experiences. A crucial first step is simply naming and recognizing your complexes. Many people find it helpful to identify their most active complexes with specific names or images, like the critic, the abandoned child, the perfectionist. Acknowledgement reduces their unconscious power. Developing an observer perspective is essential. This means cultivating the ability to notice when a complex has been activated without immediately identifying with it. Instead of, I am angry, you might notice, my anger complex is activated right now. This small shift creates space for choice rather than automatic reaction. Active imagination, Jung's method for dialoguing with unconscious contents, provides a powerful approach to complex work. By imagining a conversation with the complex as if it were a distinct personality, you can learn about its concerns, history, and needs. This dialogue helps transform the complex from an autonomous force that controls you to an aspect of yourself with which you can relate consciously. Somatic approaches recognize that complexes aren't just mental phenomena, but involve the whole body. Noticing where and how you physically experience a complex, tension patterns, posture shifts, energy changes, can provide direct access to its emotional content. Simple practices like conscious breathing, movement, or body awareness can help regulate the physiological aspects of complex activation. Therapy provides a particular effective context for complex work. The therapeutic relationship offers both safety and challenge, allowing complexes to emerge in a contained environment where they can be explored rather than simply reacted to. A skilled therapist helps identify patterns that might be difficult to see on your own and provides support through the sometimes disorienting process of complex integration. Integration of a complex doesn't mean it disappears, but that its energy and information becomes accessible to conscious awareness. Rather than autonomous control, the complex becomes a valuable source of insight and emotional depth. Its constructive aspects can be incorporated into conscious identity, while its destructive patterns lose their compulsive quality. Complexes represent both our greatest psychological challenges and our most important teachers. Each complex contains not just difficult emotions, but vital energy and information about our needs, boundaries, and unfinished psychological business. The mother complex contains our capacity for nurturing and connection. The father complex holds our relationship to structure and purpose. Even the most problematic complexes serve protective functions that deserve acknowledgement before transformation. The goal of complex work isn't to achieve a state where nothing triggers you, an impossible and undesirable aim, but to develop sufficient awareness that you can recognize complex activation when it occurs and maintain enough conscious presence to choose your response rather than react automatically. In our next video, we'll explore specific approaches to changing repetitive emotional patterns, building on this understanding of how complexes function in your psyche. We'll look at practical methods for working with triggered states and transforming problematic patterns into sources of insight and growth. For now, I invite you to reflect on your own complex patterns. What situations reliably trigger strong emotional responses in you? What familiar emotional states seem to take over at times? Can you begin to identify and name your most active complexes, those subpersonalities that emerge in predictable circumstances? Remember that bringing awareness to these patterns is already transformative. As Jung often emphasized, making the unconscious conscious is itself a significant step toward psychological freedom. Okay, bye for now. See you in the next video.